Ironwood Canyon, New Mexico Territory, 1879. The trading post erupted in savage flames as the Blackwater gang ransacked the lone outpost standing at the edge of the vast ravine. 6 mounted men circled the burning structure, their silhouettes, demonic against the inferno, whooping and firing shots into the air. "Burn it all down!" commanded Silas Blackwater, his face half hidden by a distinctive red bandana, eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Let this be a lesson about refusing our protection." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What the Blackwater gang didn't know, what would become. Their fatal miscalculation was that the slender figure watching from the shadows of a nearby mesa wasn't just another grieving widow struggling to preserve her husband's legacy. For nearly 20 years, Josephine Calloway had been the most feared weapons supplier for the Union Army, known in military intelligence circles as the Quartermaster, a woman who could procure and modify weapons that could strike with unprecedented precision from impossible distances. The Blackwater gang believed they'd found an easy target, an isolated trading post operated by a woman alone in Ironwood Canyon. They were about to discover they'd just destroyed the public face of the deadliest arms dealer in the American West. From her vantage point on the ridge, Josephine watched impassively as the flames consumed the trading post she'd operated for. The past 7 years, her weathered hands gripped a brass spyglass, the fine engraving along its barrel revealing craftsmanship far beyond what any frontier merchant should possess. The spyglass was one of countless items she'd kept from her former life, a life of precision, calculation, and lethal efficiency. The trading post had represented years of careful work, building a legitimate business, the respectable face of her weapons knowledge that had kept curious folk from asking too many questions. Most precious among her lost merchandise was the Winchester Peacemaker, a revolutionary rifle she'd personally modified with a custom firing mechanism that represented the pinnacle of her public work since leaving her covert government operations. The weapon was more than just metal and wood. It was the last project she'd completed with her husband Thomas before the Apache raid claimed him 2 winters past. At 45, Josephine still moved with the methodical precision that had made her, skills legendary among certain military circles. Her raven hair, now streaked with silver at the temples, was tied back in a practical braid, and her amber eyes tracked the raiders with cold calculation. The leather satchel slung across her shoulder hadn't seen use since she'd married Thomas, but she'd never truly abandoned her old trade. Some habits ensured survival. As the Blackwater gang disappeared into the darkness with triumphant howls, Josephine remained motionless, her mind already calculating inventory needs, production timelines, deployment strategies. The Blackwater gang had earned their fearsome reputation through brutality. 7 vicious outlaws who'd left a trail of robbery and murder across 3 territories. Their operations were methodical, efficient, and merciless in their extortion rackets. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They hadn't killed her. Through the smoke, Josephine watched the first hints of dawn paint the New Mexico sky in shades of amber and gold. Her scarred hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the action of her custom Remington revolver, counting ammunition. The familiar motions brought back memories of another life, supplying weapons that determined the outcome of battles, creating innovations that generals would kill to possess. She'd abandoned that public life when she married Thomas, choosing the quiet existence of a trading post proprietor over the constant danger of government contracts with their shifting loyalties and political entanglements. The woman known as the Quartermaster had vanished, replaced by Mrs. Calloway, respected widow and purveyor of quality goods for settlers and travelers. But as she prepared for what was to come, Josephine felt the familiar calculations rising, sharp as ever. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Through the morning haze, she recognized Marshal Ethan Blackwood riding toward what remained of her property, his expression grim. The lawman had seen 40 hard years on the frontier, his face weathered like the canyon walls themselves. "Heard the commotion from town," Blackwood called as he dismounted. "Blackwater gang?" "6 riders," Josephine confirmed, her voice steady as stone. "Took what they could carry, burned the rest." Blackwood's face creased with concern. "Those men, they're not just thieves, Josephine. They killed the Henderson family over in Copper Springs last month. No survivors." "I know their reputation, Ethan." Josephine's voice remained measured, but her eyes had taken on a predator's focus. "Just like they should have known mine," she added so softly the marshal nearly missed it. He studied her carefully. They'd known each other almost a decade, since before she'd married Thomas. "Been a long time since anyone mentioned the quartermaster," he said quietly, testing the waters. "That life is behind me." Josephine checked her revolver's action with practiced ease. "But they didn't raid the quartermaster's operation. They raided Thomas Calloway's widow's trading post. That makes it personal." Blackwood hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The Blackwaters are scattered across 3 territories, Josephine. Network of hideouts, informants. They've evaded every posse sent after them." "I'm aware of their operations." Her tone made it clear the conversation was moving into territory the marshal might not want to explore. "What exactly are you planning?" Blackwood asked, concern evident in his voice. Josephine's gaze swept across the smouldering ruins of her trading post. "Justice, Ethan. Nothing more, nothing less. The law has procedures. The law has limitations," she interrupted. "Limitations. They exploit. I don't share those constraints." Josephine led the marshal away from the ruins, toward a narrow trail that wound up the canyon wall. Few knew of its existence, and fewer still had ever followed it to its destination. The path ended at a seemingly solid rock face, unremarkable except to the most discerning eye. Josephine placed her hand on a specific outcropping, applying pressure. In a precise sequence, with barely a sound, a section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a passage into the canyon wall itself. "Dear God," Blackwood whispered as they entered. "How long have you had this?" "Since before I opened the trading post," Josephine replied, lighting an oil lamp that illuminated a space that defied the marshal's imagination. The hidden chamber was 3 times the size of her destroyed trading post, its walls lined with weapons that ranged from standard military issue to designs he'd never seen before. At the center stood a large workbench covered with tools of remarkable precision and partially assembled firearms that seemed decades ahead of current technology. "This is just one of 7 caches throughout the canyon system," Josephine explained, moving toward a section where maps covered the wall, each specialized for different purposes. Blackwood stared in disbelief. "All these years I thought you were just a shopkeeper who knew a bit about guns." That was the intention. Josephine lit additional lamps, revealing the true scale of the operation. The trading post was cover, nothing more. She moved deeper into the chamber, past conventional firearms to the specialized weapons that had earned her reputation as the quartermaster. These weren't simple guns. They were precision instruments designed for specific operations, a rifle with an unusual barrel configuration capable of maintaining accuracy at twice the normal range. A compact shotgun that could be assembled from seemingly innocuous parts carried in a saddlebag. A revolver with interchangeable cylinders and firing mechanisms that could be customized for any tactical situation. From a locked cabinet, she withdrew a leather-bound journal filled with detailed maps, notes, and sketches. Josephine had spent years documenting every outlaw hideout, every trail used by bandits, every approach to settlements throughout the territory. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. This wasn't just geographical knowledge. It was tactical intelligence gathered methodically and patiently. "First things first," she said, spreading the maps across a work table. "Know your enemy." The Blackwater gang operated differently from most outlaws. Instead of quick robberies and hasty retreats, they established control over territories, extorting protection payments from remote settlements and businesses. Their operation was systematic, almost military in its precision, which had allowed them to evade law enforcement for years. Josephine traced their known movements with her finger, identifying patterns that others had missed. The gang wasn't random. In their depredations, they followed a calculated schedule, hitting locations when they were most vulnerable and least likely to receive quick assistance. "Silas Blackwater," she muttered, pulling out a detailed dossier she'd compiled on the gang leader. "Former Confederate cavalry, dishonorable discharge for excessive brutality, brings military tactics to his criminal enterprise." Blackwood watched, in stunned silence, as Josephine revealed the extent of her intelligence network. "How long have you been tracking them?" "I track everyone who might become a threat," she replied matter-of-factly. "The Blackwaters entered my territory 6 months ago. I've been documenting their movements since." She moved to a different section of the workshop, where unconventional materials were stored in precise order. Josephine's expertise had never been limited to conventional firearms. During her government work, she'd pioneered techniques that combined chemistry, engineering, and metallurgy to create weapons that defied expectations. From various containers, she began selecting components, chemicals that would react in specific ways, metals chosen for particular properties, mechanisms designed to operate under extreme conditions. To someone without her training, the collection would seem random, possibly even harmless. In Josephine's hands, they were the building blocks of sophisticated weapons. The sound of hoofbeats outside halted their conversation. Josephine instantly extinguished the lamps and moved silently to a narrow observation slit cut into the rock wall. Through it, she watched as 3 riders passed through the canyon, locals from the nearest settlement by their dress, but something about their manner raised her suspicions. Looking awfully hard at the ground for men just passing through, she whispered, noting how they studied the trail with unusual intensity. The realization came quickly. The Blackwaters had eyes and ears in the nearby settlements. These men were tracking her, probably hired after Marshal Blackwood had been seen riding toward her burned trading post. The gang was smarter than she'd given them credit for. They recognized potential threats and moved to neutralize them quickly. Josephine waited until the riders had passed before rekindling her lamp. "This changes things," she said, returning to her maps. "They're watching for official response. They'll be expecting a posse, not—" She trailed off. "Not the quartermaster," Blackwood finished for her. She nodded, making additional notes, then began the process of selecting which weapons would accompany her. Each choice was deliberate. A modified Spencer rifle with custom sights and specialized ammunition for long-range precision. A pair of Remington revolvers with adjustments to the firing mechanism that eliminated the telltale click of the hammer being cocked. And finally, from a hidden compartment beneath the workbench, she withdrew her masterpiece, a weapon unlike any other. The Spectre, as Thomas had named it, didn't look like a conventional firearm. Its lines were sleeker, its mechanism more complex. Josephine had designed it during her final days in government service, a weapon so advanced that her superiors had demanded she destroy the prototypes and burn the plans. They'd feared what it could do in the wrong hands. Josephine had complied. Publicly, privately, she'd completed the design, refining it over years of secret work. The weapon fired specialized ammunition that traveled without the distinctive crack of conventional bullets, delivering lethal force with a sound no louder than a whispered breath. For close encounters, it's undetectable, she explained as Blackwood examined it with professional interest. For an ambush, it's perfect. Never thought I'd see something like this outside an army arsenal, he remarked, handling the weapon with reverent care. You wouldn't, Josephine confirmed, because officially it doesn't exist. As she worked, her mind drifted to Thomas. Her husband had known fragments of her past and had accepted the shadows she carried from years of designing tools for war. He'd helped her channel those skills toward legitimate purposes: hunting rifles, target pistols, tools for frontier survival. He believed I could leave the quartermaster behind, she said softly, but some skills don't fade, they just wait for necessity. From another sealed container, Josephine retrieved items that bore no resemblance to weapons at all. Common objects that seemed innocuous. A lady's compact mirror with edges sharpened to razor precision, a hairpin designed to double as a lockpick, a belt buckle that concealed a garrote wire. During my government days, I learned that weapons don't always look like weapons, she explained. Sometimes the most effective tools are those no one recognizes as threats. By midday, Josephine had assembled an arsenal tailored specifically for hunting the Blackwater gang. Each weapon, each tool had been chosen with purpose, maintained meticulously over years of isolation. The preparations brought a familiar focus, the same cold clarity that had guided her when designing weapons that would change the course of conflicts. Before leaving the cache, Josephine approached a small shrine in the corner of the workshop. A photograph of Thomas stood surrounded by tools he'd made, the craftsman's legacy. Beside it lay a folded American flag and a sealed letter from the Secretary of War, thanking her for services that could never be publicly acknowledged. I tried it your way, Thomas, she said to the photograph, built legitimate things, created rather than destroyed. Her fingers traced the frame gently. But some people only understand destruction. Marshal Blackwood watched this private moment. With newfound understanding, the woman he'd known as a capable but unassuming trading post proprietor had been a carefully constructed facade. The real Josephine Calloway was now emerging, methodical, precise, and utterly lethal. What happens now? He asked as she packed her selected arsenal into specially designed saddlebags, each compartment customized to hold specific weapons securely and silently. Now, Josephine replied, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had made peace with. Necessary violence, I become what they fear most, a ghost they cannot see, cannot hear, but who sees and hears everything. She secured the hidden entrance behind them as they departed. The Blackwater gang is about to learn the true cost of their mistake. As they emerged into the canyon, the midday sun casting harsh shadows across the landscape, Josephine paused to survey the terrain. Her trading post might be ashes, but her true resources remained untouched, hidden throughout the canyon in caches that only she could locate. I can deputize a posse, Blackwood offered, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. No, Josephine said firmly, your men would be walking into a slaughter. The Blackwaters have military training and superior numbers, and you don't. A ghost of a smile touched her lips for the first time since the raid. I have something better, Ethan. I have 20 years of designing ways to neutralize men exactly like them. I have patience they can't imagine, and resources they don't know exist. She mounted her horse, the saddlebags containing her specialized arsenal secured behind her. Return to town. Maintain normal patrols. Let them think their intimidation worked. And what will you be doing? The marshal asked. Josephine's eyes scanned the distant ridgelines, already calculating angles, distances, and approaches. I'll be dismantling the Blackwater gang piece by piece, starting with their eyes and ears in the settlements." She adjusted her hat against the glaring sun. "By the time Silas Blackwater realizes what's happening, it will be far too late to stop it." As Blackwood rode back toward town, he glanced over his shoulder at the solitary figure of Josephine Calloway, now barely visible against the canyon wall. He'd come expecting to comfort a widow who'd lost her livelihood. Instead, he discovered that the Blackwater gang had made the gravest error of their criminal careers. They hadn't just destroyed a trading post, they'd awakened the quartermaster. Twilight painted Ironwood Canyon in deepening shades of purple and crimson as Josephine approached her second weapons cache. Unlike the main repository she'd shown Marshal Blackwood, this one was designed for surveillance and intelligence gathering rather than direct confrontation. Nestled within an abandoned silver mine that most locals believed had been sealed after a collapse, the entrance was concealed behind a false rock slide that could be navigated only if one knew the precise footholds. The air inside held the musty scent of earth and old timber as she lit specialized lamps that burned without smoke. The chamber illuminated to reveal walls covered with detailed maps of the territory, each annotated with her precise handwriting. Red pins marked confirmed Blackwater gang sightings. Blue pins indicated suspected hideouts. Yellow markers highlighted civilian settlements vulnerable to their operations. Josephine removed her trail dust-covered coat and approached a workbench where an unusual apparatus rested. Unlike the weapons in her primary cache, this device had no obvious military purpose. It resembled a surveyor's equipment with brass fittings and precision lenses, but contained modifications that would baffle conventional engineers. "Time to see what you've been up to, Silas," she murmured, adjusting components with practiced hands. The device, she called it the cartographer, was of her own design, created during the final years of the war, when traditional intelligence gathering proved insufficient. It allowed her to compile disparate information into three-dimensional tactical assessments, revealing patterns invisible to standard analysis. From a leather satchel, Josephine withdrew dozens of small notes, information gathered by her network, of unwitting informants throughout the territory. Shopkeepers who mentioned unusual purchases, stagecoach drivers who reported suspicious travelers, bartenders who overheard fragments of conversation. Each seemingly insignificant detail found its place in her analytical framework. As she worked, transferring this intelligence to the cartographer's system of interconnected markers and weighted strings, a pattern began to emerge. The Blackwater gang wasn't just expanding their territory, they were systematically eliminating potential competition while establishing a stranglehold on supply routes throughout the region. "Controlling the lifelines," she concluded, studying the visualization. "Cut off official shipments, become the only source for essential goods." Their raid on her trading post suddenly made strategic sense. She hadn't just refused their protection, demands. Her operation had represented an independent supply point that undermined their monopolistic ambitions. A movement indicator on the cave entrance triggered the delicate pressure plate she'd installed, alerting her to potential company. Josephine extinguished the lamps and moved to a concealed observation port, specialized lens, allowing her to see in the diminished light. After a tense moment, she recognized the newcomer, Eli Whitefeather, a Cherokee scout who had occasionally supplied her trading post with game and information. "You can come out, Josephine," he called softly into the darkness. "I know you're watching." She emerged from concealment, Remington revolver still in hand. "You're taking chances coming here, Eli." The scout's weathered face showed mild amusement. "Says the woman with a price on her head? Already?" Josephine's eyebrow raised. "The Blackwaters move quickly." $500 dead or alive, Eli confirmed. "Posted in 3 settlements since this morning. Seems they didn't appreciate you surviving their hospitality." Josephine rekindled one lamp, its light revealing the cartographer. Eli studied it with undisguised curiosity. "You were never just a trader, were you?" he observed. "What gave me away?" A rare hint of humor touched her voice. "Knew something was different when you correctly identified the manufacture date of my grandfather's rifle down to the month." Eli moved closer to examine the elaborate visualization she'd created. "What is all this?" "The Blackwater Gang's operation, their movements, their patterns." She gestured to specific clusters of markers. "They've established 3 main zones of control, each with primary and secondary hideouts. Their raiding parties follow consistent rotations, never hitting the same area twice in succession, creating the illusion of randomness while actually maintaining strict operational security." Eli's expression showed newfound respect. "You sound like you fought in the war." "I didn't fight," Josephine corrected. "I made sure our side had what they needed to win." Understanding dawned in the scout's eyes. "The quartermaster," he said quietly. "There were stories among the Cherokee scouts about a woman who could produce weapons that never existed before, delivered exactly when and where they were needed most." Josephine neither confirmed nor denied, instead pointing to a specific area. On her map, "The Blackwaters have established their main camp here, at Serpent's Gulch. Difficult terrain, easily defended, with multiple escape routes." "That's suicide to approach," Eli noted. 30 men at least, with clear sightlines in every direction. "Which is why I won't be approaching it." Josephine traced a finger along several outlying markers. "Their operation depends on scouts and informants feeding information back to the main camp. Remove those eyes and ears, and Silas Blackwater becomes blind." She returned to the workbench and opened a sealed wooden case. Inside, nestled in velvet compartments, lay small glass vials filled with various colored liquids and powders. "During the war, I discovered that defeating an enemy often had little to do with superior firepower." She selected specific vials with methodical care. "Disruption of their ability to function as a coordinated unit is far more effective." Eli watched as she transferred the contents to specialized delivery systems, small, innocuous containers that could be mistaken for common items. "These will induce specific symptoms," she explained. "Nothing lethal, but sufficient to remove key personnel from operation temporarily. Delivered to the right locations, they'll create enough confusion to mask my true purpose." "And what is your true purpose?" Eli asked. Josephine's amber eyes took on a cold gleam in the lamplight. "To dismantle the Blackwater Gang so thoroughly that their name becomes a warning to others who might consider similar operations." She unrolled a detailed map of the nearest settlement, Cooperton, a small mining community that served as the Blackwater's eyes on the eastern approach to the canyon. "Their informants gather at Jensen's saloon each evening to coordinate reports," she continued. "The barkeep, 2 miners on Blackwater payroll, and a teamster who carries messages to their secondary camp." Eli studied the map. 4 men. You're planning to take them all at once? Not take them. Neutralize their effectiveness. Josephine's plan reflected the precision that had made her legendary during the war. By morning, Silas Blackwater will have received conflicting information from multiple sources, creating confusion about potential threats while concealing my actual movements. As she prepared for the evening's operation, Josephine opened a specially designed wardrobe concealed behind a false wall. Unlike the practical frontier clothing she'd worn as a trading post proprietor, these garments served specific tactical purposes. She selected a dress of deep burgundy, the color chosen to absorb shadow while remaining unremarkable in a saloon setting. Its design appeared fashionable to casual observation, but contained hidden compartments for her specialized tools. A matching shawl could be reconfigured to mask her face or create different silhouettes as needed. "You intend to walk straight into Jensen's?" Eli asked, surprise evident in his voice. The most effective approach is often the one enemies least expect, Josephine replied, applying subtle cosmetics that would alter her appearance just enough to prevent immediate recognition. A solitary woman in mourning garb would draw attention. A traveling lady seeking refreshment after a day's journey is beneath notice. She secured her hair in an elaborate style that bore little resemblance to her usual practical braid, then added final touches to her disguise, specialized tinted glasses that altered the apparent color of her eyes while enhancing her night vision, and gloves that concealed both her distinctive scarring and the delivery mechanisms for her chemical compounds. "They'll be looking for the grieving widow from the trading post," she explained. "They won't see Eleanor Blackwood, wealthy widow from San Francisco passing through on business matters." From another compartment, she retrieved identification papers and credentials supporting this cover identity, documents so flawlessly crafted they would withstand all but the most rigorous examination. "I need you to create a diversion on the Western Canyon approach," she instructed Eli. "Something to draw attention without raising alarm. Enough to pull any additional Blackwater scouts in that direction while I work in Cooperton." The scout nodded. "Campfire where none should be? Perhaps signs of a small group passing through?" "Perfect." Josephine checked her specialized timepiece, another of her wartime inventions, synchronized to standard railroad time, but with additional functions concealed within its elegant casing. "Implement at precisely 8 o'clock. I'll be in position at Jensen's by then." As dusk settled over Ironwood Canyon, Josephine made final preparations. She wouldn't carry obvious weapons into Cooperton. Such items would immediately mark her as a potential threat. Instead, her arsenal consisted of seemingly innocent accessories, each modified for lethal purpose if necessary. Hairpins that could be deployed as throwing darts with paralytic coating. A decorative fan with edges sharp, enough to slice through leather. The delicate chain of her necklace, capable of becoming a garrote in seconds. Most importantly, she carried specialized delivery systems for her disruption compounds. Drops that could be added to drinks, powders that would absorb through skin contact, vapors that would induce specific symptoms when inhaled. "Remember," she told Eli as they prepared to depart, "this isn't about confrontation. It's about systematic dismantling of their operational capability. Tonight, we remove their intelligence network in Cooperton. Tomorrow, we sever their supply line at Granite Pass." The scout studied her transformation with undisguised admiration. "The woman who walked in here an hour ago has completely vanished." "That's the point," Josephine replied, her voice now carrying the refined accent of San Francisco society. "The quartermaster works best when no one knows she exists at all." Cooperton hummed with evening activity as Josephine's rented carriage rolled down its single main street. The mining settlement consisted of little more than 24 buildings, clustered around the copper processing facility that gave the town its name and purpose. Jensen's saloon occupied the largest structure, its windows glowing with lamplight and the sounds of piano music spilling into the street. Josephine instructed her driver, an old man from the neighboring settlement who had no connection to her true identity, to wait at the small hotel across from the saloon. Her entrance was carefully calculated, neither too hesitant nor too confident, the demeanor of a woman of means accustomed to traveling alone but maintaining appropriate caution. Inside, Jensen's offered the standard frontier combination of watered whiskey, half-hearted gambling, and exaggerated tales. Josephine scanned the room with practiced efficiency, identifying her targets within moments. The barkeep, Jensen himself, wiped glasses behind the scarred wooden counter. Two miners in dirt-stained clothes occupied a corner table, their position offering clear views of both the main entrance and the back door. The teamster sat alone at the bar, his trail-worn appearance suggesting recent travel. Josephine selected A small table near the piano player, positioned to observe all 4 targets, while remaining partially concealed by the modest crowd. When the barmaid approached, she ordered a sherry with the refined accent of her cover identity, explaining her presence with a practiced story about business investments in neighboring settlements. "Don't get many ladies of quality passing through," the barmaid remarked, "especially traveling alone. My late husband believed women were perfectly capable of handling business affairs," Josephine replied, with the practiced ease of her fabricated biography. "I find his confidence was not misplaced." As she sipped her sherry, she observed the subtle communications between her targets. The nod between Jensen and the miners. The folded paper passed from the teamster to the barkeep. Their operational security was adequate for frontier standards, but laughably transparent to someone trained in intelligence operations. Josephine implemented her plan with methodical patience. When the barmaid returned to check on her, she requested introductions to anyone knowledgeable about local investment opportunities, a natural pretext that the woman was happy to facilitate. Soon, the teamster had joined her table, unable to resist the combination of an attractive widow and potential financial opportunity. "Samuel Hollis, ma'am," he introduced himself with affected gallantry. "Freight hauling throughout the territory. If you're considering investments in transportation, I'd be honored to offer my expertise." "How fortunate," Josephine replied with calculated warmth. "I've been considering expanding shipping interests into this region. Perhaps you could enlighten me about the local routes." As they conversed, she employed techniques refined during her intelligence years, leading questions, flattering attention, and subtle manipulation that encouraged the teamster to demonstrate his knowledge while gradually consuming the whiskey she'd ordered for him. With practiced sleight of hand, she introduced the first of her compounds into his glass, a formulation that would induce symptoms resembling influenza within hours. "You seem very knowledgeable about which routes are safe and which to avoid," she observed, steering the conversation toward her true objective. "Got to be in my business," Hollis replied, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Some areas are best traveled with proper arrangements, if you understand my meaning." "Protection agreements?" Josephine suggested, the wealthy widow's naivety. "A perfect cover for gathering intelligence. Something like that." He drained his doctored whiskey. "But don't you worry yourself about such matters. Should you decide to invest, I have connections that ensure smooth operations." By the time Josephine excused herself from his company an hour later, Hollis had revealed far more than he intended about the Blackwater Gang's protection racket, their territorial boundaries, and most importantly, the schedule for his next message. Delivery to their secondary camp. The miners proved more challenging. Their position and demeanor suggested greater discipline, likely former soldiers recruited for their combat experience rather than simple thugs. Direct approach would raise suspicions. Instead, Josephine implemented her contingency plan. She arranged for the barmaid to deliver drinks to their table, a gesture of appreciation to hard-working men from a lady impressed by the town's industry, while she engaged Jensen in conversation about local properties available for purchase. The specialized compound coating the glass rims would absorb through skin contact, creating symptoms of food poisoning by morning. Jensen himself presented the final challenge. As proprietor, he remained behind his bar, accepting no drinks from others and maintaining vigilance throughout the evening. Josephine had anticipated this operational security. While discussing potential property investments, she removed her gloves to examine documents he provided, deliberately knocking her sherry glass to create momentary confusion. In the brief seconds of distraction as Jensen reached for a towel, she employed a specialized delivery device concealed in her ring, a nearly invisible pin that delivered her final compound when they shook hands to conclude their conversation. "I do apologize for the clumsiness," she said with embarrassment perfectly calibrated to disarm suspicion. "Travel fatigue, I'm afraid." "Think nothing of it, Mrs. Blackwood," Jensen assured her, completely unaware of the contact agent now entering his bloodstream. A compound that would cause temporary but severe disorientation within hours. By the time, Josephine departed Jensen's saloon. All 4 of Blackwater's Cooperton informants had been neutralized without a single one suspecting her true purpose. Their symptoms would manifest after she was long gone, appearing to be unfortunate but natural illnesses rather than coordinated sabotage. Outside, she noted with satisfaction the glow of Eli's diversion campfire visible on the distant ridge. Right, on schedule, drawing the attention of anyone watching the western approaches. The operation had proceeded with clockwork precision, exactly as she'd designed it. In her rented room at Cooperton's modest hotel, Josephine removed her disguise and documented the evening's intelligence in a cipher of her own creation. The Teamster's information about delivery schedules proved particularly valuable, confirming the location of the Blackwater Gang's secondary camp and identifying a vulnerability in their communication network. By midnight, she had departed Cooperton, as silently as she'd arrived, leaving no trace of Eleanor Blackwood beyond the impression of a wealthy widow considering business investments. The rented carriage returned her to the canyon before turning back, its elderly driver having no knowledge of her true destination. Eli waited at the rendezvous point, his expression suggesting successful implementation of his diversion. 3. "Scouts took the bait," he reported as they made their way back to the hidden cache. "Rode out to investigate the campfire, found nothing but cold ashes by the time they arrived." "Perfect," Josephine replied, her voice returning to its natural cadence as she shed the last vestiges of her cover identity. "By morning, Silas Blackwater will have 4 incapacitated informants in Cooperton. No intelligence from the western approach and growing uncertainty about potential threats." Inside the cache, she updated the cartographer with the new intelligence, adding detailed notes about the Blackwater Gang's protection operations and communication protocols. The pattern became even clearer: a sophisticated criminal enterprise, with military-style organization, establishing dominance through strategic control of key resources and transportation routes. "Their operation is more extensive than I initially believed," she told Eli as the visualization expanded. "They're not just building a gang, they're establishing governance, becoming the de facto authority in areas where official law has minimal presence. Making them much more dangerous than common bandits," the scout observed, "and much more vulnerable to systematic disruption." Josephine traced the connections between outposts on her map. Traditional law enforcement thinks in terms of confrontation, posses, and gunfights. The Blackwaters have prepared for those responses with superior numbers and defensive positions. Her finger moved to the communication lines between operations. "But remove their ability to coordinate, introduce conflicting information into their decision-making process, and their advantage collapses." As dawn approached, Josephine finalized her plan for the next phase. The Blackwater supply line through Granite Pass would be her next target, not through direct attack, but through precision intervention that would appear as natural misfortune rather than deliberate sabotage. "Tomorrow," she told Eli as they prepared to separate until their next rendezvous, "the Blackwater Gang begins to experience the consequences of targeting the wrong trading post." The scout studied her for a moment. "They burned your business, destroyed your merchandise. Most folks would seek simple revenge." "I'm not seeking revenge, Eli." Josephine packed specialized equipment for the next day's operation. "I'm implementing justice through strategic dismantling of a criminal enterprise. Revenge is emotional. This is architectural." As she secured the hidden entrance to the cache, Josephine's mind was already calculating the cascade of consequences. Her actions in Cooperton would trigger confusion among Blackwater's leadership, resources diverted to investigate apparent illness among key personnel, vulnerability created through information gaps. The first pieces had been placed on the board. The systematic dismantling of the Blackwater gang had begun, set in motion by criminals who believed they were merely burning a widow's trading post, unaware they had awakened the quartermaster. Granite Pass carved a narrow channel through towering stone walls, creating a natural bottleneck that served as the primary supply route into the Western Territories. Sheer cliffs rose hundreds of feet on either side, leaving barely enough room for a single wagon to navigate the treacherous pathway. In military terms, it represented the perfect ambush point, a fact not lost on Josephine as she surveyed the terrain from a concealed position on the eastern ridge. Dawn painted the landscape in golden hues as she studied the approach through specialized field glasses. The Blackwater gang's supply convoy would arrive within the hour, according to the intelligence she'd gathered in Cooperton. 6 wagons carrying ammunition, provisions and contraband, accompanied by 12 armed men. A significant investment of resources that demonstrated the operation's importance to their enterprise. Unlike her approach in Cooperton, this mission required more direct intervention. Josephine had spent the night preparing at her third cache, a specialized armory concealed beneath an abandoned settler's cabin 2 miles south. This repository contained weapons designed for situations where stealth and distance took priority. Over confrontation, she adjusted her position, ensuring the specialized rifle beside her remained concealed from any observers below. The weapon, she called it the Horizon, represented one of her most advanced designs, capable of accuracy at ranges conventional firearms couldn't achieve. Its unusual configuration included a custom barrel, specialized ammunition, and a telescopic sight of her own invention that compensated for factors most marksmen never considered. Range estimation complete, she whispered to herself, adjusting the specialized sights. Wind speed 11 miles per hour, northeasterly. Temperature 64 degrees. Elevation differential 712 feet. From her vantage point, Josephine could observe the entire pass while remaining invisible to those below. Her position wasn't chosen for direct attack. The Blackwaters were too well armed for frontal assault. Instead, she had spent the pre-dawn hours making subtle modifications to the pass itself, transforming the terrain into an active component of her strategy. At key points along the narrowest sections, she had placed specially designed devices beneath. Loose rocks and within crevices, not explosives, such crude methods would risk unintended casualties and leave evidence of deliberate sabotage. Instead, she employed sophisticated mechanical triggers that, when activated remotely, would initiate what would appear to be a natural rock slide. The distant rumble of wagon wheels drew her attention to the eastern approach. Right on schedule, the Blackwater convoy appeared, moving with the practiced efficiency that reflected their military background. Josephine observed their formation through her field glasses, noting the disciplined spacing between wagons and the alert posture of the outriders. Leading the column was a figure she recognized immediately from her intelligence dossier. Isaac Blackwater, Silas's younger brother and the gang's logistics specialist. His presence confirmed the convoy's importance, as he rarely left the main camp except for critical operations. The quartermaster allowed herself a moment of cold satisfaction. Her disruptions in Cooperton had already altered their standard procedures, forcing them to commit key personnel to operations usually delegated to subordinates. As the convoy entered the narrowest section of the pass, Josephine retrieved a device from her equipment bag, a brass cylinder with intricate clockwork mechanisms, visible through small glass panels. This specialized trigger would activate her planted devices in a precisely timed sequence, creating a cascading effect that would appear entirely natural. Unlike a traditional ambush, her strategy didn't aim to destroy the convoy completely. Total destruction would alert the Blackwaters to deliberate sabotage and trigger maximum response. Instead, she sought controlled disruption, damage sufficient to compromise their supply line while appearing as unfortunate natural circumstances rather than coordinated attack. Josephine waited until the lead wagon reached the first marker position, then activated the trigger with a precise quarter turn of its calibrated dial. Below, a small section of the canyon wall crumbled, sending rocks tumbling onto the trail ahead of the convoy. The teamsters reacted immediately, halting the wagons as outriders moved forward to assess the blockage. This initial slide served its purpose, halting the convoy and concentrating their attention on the trail ahead while positioning the wagons precisely where Josephine needed them. As the Blackwater men dismounted to clear the minor obstruction, she made a subtle adjustment to the specialized rifle, aligning it with her true target, not the men, but a specific wagon second from the rear. Through her intelligence gathering, Josephine had identified this particular wagon as carrying ammunition and explosives. A direct hit would create catastrophic damage, but her plan required more surgical precision. She aimed instead at a specialized device she'd planted on the canyon wall directly above the wagon during her pre-dawn preparations. The Horizon's report echoed through the canyon, but by the time the sound reached the convoy, her specialized bullet had already struck its target. The device activated on impact, releasing a calibrated mechanism that dislodged a section of rock face carefully selected to impact the supply wagon with sufficient force to damage it without raising suspicion of deliberate targeting. The resulting rockslide appeared entirely natural, a section of the unstable canyon wall giving way under its own weight. The Blackwater men scattered as rocks rained down, focusing entirely on self-preservation rather than identifying the distant origin of the triggering shot. The ammunition wagon took the brunt of the slide, its contents partially buried and its axle cracked from the impact. Josephine observed the chaos through her field glasses, noting with satisfaction how Isaac Blackwater organized his men to address what they perceived as an unfortunate natural occurrence. Their disciplined response confirmed her assessment. These weren't common bandits, but trained fighters operating with military precision. As the Blackwater men worked to salvage what they could from the damaged wagon, Josephine activated the second phase of her plan. Another quarter turn of the trigger device initiated a smaller slide further along the pass, effectively blocking their forward progress. The convoy now found itself trapped between two rockfalls, unable to advance or retreat with their heavy wagons. Isaac Blackwater's reaction revealed his military training. He quickly organized his men into defensive positions while dispatching two riders, one east and one attempting to scale the western ridge to find an alternate route. This division of forces was precisely what Josephine had anticipated, creating the opportunity for the next phase of her operation. The rider attempting the western climb provided the perfect target to demonstrate the consequences of entering Josephine's territory. She adjusted the Horizon's position, calculating the extreme angle with methodical precision. This shot would be technically demanding, a moving target on an irregular vertical path at a range that would challenge even the most skilled military. Sharpshooters. Exhale half, she murmured, following the procedure she'd developed years ago. Hold. Gentle pressure. The rifle's report echoed again, but this time with a purpose beyond triggering rock slides. The specialized ammunition, her own design, struck with surgical precision, finding the narrow gap between the rider's hat and collar. The man fell from his mount, tumbling down the steep incline before coming to rest motionless on a rocky outcropping. From her position, Josephine observed the immediate reaction below. The Blackwater men scrambled for cover, suddenly aware they were under attack but unable to determine the shooter's location. Isaac shouted orders, directing return fire toward likely sniper positions, but their conventional weapons couldn't hope to reach her elevated position at such extreme range. Josephine didn't fire again. A single shot was sufficient to transform their understanding of the situation from natural misfortune to deliberate ambush. Now they would be forced to divide their attention between salvaging their supplies and defending against an unseen attacker, exactly the pressure point she had designed to exploit. With practiced efficiency, she disassembled the horizon, securing its components in a specialized case that distributed the weight evenly. By the time the Blackwater gang organized a search party for the ridge, Josephine had already relocated to her secondary position 200 yards east, where she could continue observation while remaining undetected. From this new vantage point, she watched Isaac Blackwater's increasingly desperate attempts to manage the crisis. The convoy that should have reached their western outpost by midday was now immobilized, one wagon damaged beyond repair, its contents partially buried, a man dead, and the pass blocked in both directions. More significant than the physical damage was the strategic impact. The Blackwaters now faced critical decisions: commit additional resources to rescue the convoy, abandon valuable supplies, or leave Isaac and his men vulnerable while they cleared the blockages. Each option would further strain their operational capacity, already compromised by the disruptions in Cooperton. As the afternoon progressed, Josephine observed new developments that confirmed her strategy's effectiveness. A messenger arrived from the east, one of the riders she'd neutralized in Cooperton, now visibly suffering from her chemical compounds. The man's obvious illness, combined with his frantic delivery, suggested the confusion her operation had generated at the gang's communication hubs. Isaac's reaction told her everything she needed to know. His gestures became more agitated, his orders more urgent. The coordinated criminal enterprise was experiencing cascading failures across multiple operations simultaneously, each problem demanding resources that would normally be allocated elsewhere. By sunset, the Blackwaters had managed to clear only one of the rock slides, consolidating salvageable supplies into 4 wagons while abandoning the damaged vehicle and its partially buried contents. Their defensive posture had shifted from organized response to nervous vigilance, men jumping at shadows as darkness approached in the narrow confines of the pass. Josephine packed her observation equipment and began her withdrawal as night fell. This phase of her operation had achieved multiple objectives: disruption of critical supplies, elimination of key personnel, and most importantly, the introduction of uncertainty into their operational planning. The Blackwater gang now knew they were being targeted, but couldn't identify their adversary or predict where the next strike would occur. As she navigated the ridgeline path back toward her primary cache, Josephine mentally calculated the cascade effects her actions would trigger throughout the Blackwater organization. The supplies delayed or lost at Granite Pass would create shortages at western outposts. The dead man would require replacement, drawing personnel from other operations. The uncertainty would demand increased security across all installations, stretching their manpower thin. Most significantly, Isaac Blackwater would report to his brother that they were facing an adversary with military-grade weaponry, exceptional marksmanship, and intimate knowledge of their supply routes, a threat assessment that would force Silas to adapt his strategies and potentially expose new vulnerabilities. By midnight, Josephine had returned to her primary cache, where Eli waited with fresh intelligence gathered from his network of contacts throughout the territory. The scout's expression suggested developments beyond their planned operations. "Blackwater's responding," he reported as she secured her equipment, "pulling men from 3 outposts to reinforce the main camp. They're offering double bounty for information about the trading post Widow." "That's unexpected," Josephine noted. Adding this information to the cartographer, "They're consolidating rather than dispersing. Suggests they've identified me as the source of their troubles more quickly than anticipated." "There's more," Eli continued. They've brought in specialists, 3 men who arrived at the main camp yesterday, not regular gang members. One's a tracker from the Dakota territories. The others have military bearing. This development required recalibration of her strategy. Josephine had expected a more dispersed response, with the Blackwaters strengthening defenses across their territory. Concentration of forces at the main camp suggested Silas was preparing not just to defend, but to eliminate the threat directly. They're bringing the fight to us, rather than waiting for the next strike, she concluded, already calculating adjustments to her operational timeline. Silas is more adaptable than his record suggested. What does this mean for your plan? Eli asked. The Josephine studied the cartographer, noting how the pattern of Blackwater movements had shifted in response to her operations. It means we accelerate. The specialist suggests Silas has identified me specifically rather than perceiving a general threat. The concentration of forces creates vulnerability in their network of outposts. She moved to a secured cabinet, retrieving maps of areas previously marked as secondary targets. We need to neutralize their remaining outposts before they can be reinforced. Create enough disruption to force Silas to either disperse his concentration or maintain it at the cost of his broader operation. As she outlined the revised strategy, Josephine recognized the escalation represented both risk and opportunity. The Blackwaters were responding more aggressively than anticipated, but in doing so, they were abandoning the methodical approach that had made them effective. Emotion was beginning to override strategy, exactly the vulnerability she had designed. Her operations to create. Tonight we rest, she told Eli, securing the cache for the evening. Tomorrow, we target their communications hub at Eagle Point. If Silas wants to concentrate his forces, we'll ensure he does so blind and deaf to developments beyond his immediate control. As she prepared for the few hours of sleep, her enhanced physiology required, Josephine reviewed the day's achievements with cold precision. The systematic dismantling of the Blackwater gang was proceeding according to design, each action creating consequences that would cascade through their organization. The burning of her trading post had set in motion a response its perpetrators could never have anticipated. The methodical destruction of their entire criminal enterprise, engineered by a woman whose true capabilities they had fatally underestimated. Eagle Point rose like a stone sentinel above the surrounding landscape, a natural watchtower that commanded views across 3 counties. The Blackwater gang had recognized its strategic value early in their expansion, establishing their primary communications hub atop its flat summit. From this position, they coordinated operations throughout the territory using a sophisticated relay system of signal mirrors by day and lantern patterns by night. Approaching Eagle Point presented challenges unlike anything Josephine had faced. In her previous operations against the gang, unlike Cooperton with its public access or Granite Pass with its distant vantage points, the summit could be reached only by a single narrow trail that switchbacked up the steep eastern face. The Blackwaters had fortified this approach with 3 guard positions and cleared the surrounding vegetation to eliminate any cover for potential attackers. Direct assault would be suicide, Josephine concluded, as she studied the position through her field glasses from a concealed location 2 miles east. 6 men minimum at the summit, 3 on the trail, clear sightlines in all directions. Beside her, Eli Whitefeather nodded grimly. Even at night, they maintain double watches. No one approaches without being spotted. Dawn was still hours away as they observed the rhythmic pattern of lantern signals from the summit, coded communications coordinating the gang's response to the disruptions at Cooperton and Granite Pass. Each flash represented intelligence being distributed throughout the Blackwater network, adapting their operations to the new threats they faced. Those signals are their nervous system. Josephine observed. Every outpost depends on that coordination. Disrupt it, and the entire organization begins to fragment. But reaching the summit to neutralize the communications hub required an approach that couldn't be found in conventional tactics. For this operation, Josephine had accessed her fourth weapons cache, a specialized repository that contained her most unconventional designs, devices that defied traditional classification as weapons yet served lethal purpose when properly deployed. "We won't be using the trail," she informed Eli, retrieving an oilskin-wrapped package from her equipment. "Tonight, we make our own approach." She unwrapped the package to reveal what appeared to be thin leather harnesses with unusual mechanical components integrated into their design. Eli studied them with undisguised curiosity. "These look military, but not like any equipment I've seen before." "Because they never entered official service," Josephine explained, checking the specialized gears and tension mechanisms. "I designed these for mountain operations during the war, scaling approaches military commanders deemed impassable." The harnesses, she had named them spiders, represented one of her most innovative creations. Using principles adapted from industrial mining equipment, they allowed scaling of near-vertical surfaces by distributing weight across multiple anchor points, while requiring minimal physical exertion from the user. "We'll approach from the north. Face," she continued, indicating the sheer cliff that the Blackwaters had left unguarded precisely because they believed it impossible to climb. The limestone composition provides ideal anchor points for the spider's mechanisms. As full darkness settled over the territory, Josephine and Eli made their way to the base of Eagle Point's northern face. Here, the cliff rose almost vertically. For 300 feet, its surface a complex network of small ledges and fractures, invisible to observers without specialized knowledge of geological formations. "The spider works through mechanical advantage," Josephine explained as she helped Eli into the unfamiliar equipment. "Each movement upward is amplified while requiring minimal strain. The key is methodical progression. Never rush, never extend beyond the preset limits of the gearing system." Her own harness included several modifications not present in Eli's, specialized compartments containing tools for the operation ahead, and a custom quick-release mechanism that would allow immediate deployment of weapons if discovered. Unlike her previous operations, this infiltration carried substantially higher risk of direct confrontation. Their ascent began in perfect silence, the spider's mechanisms designed specifically to eliminate the metallic sounds that would betray their presence to guards above. Josephine led, establishing the path through decades of experience reading. Rock formations. Each placement of the spider's anchors required precise judgment, testing weight distribution before committing to the next movement upward. An hour into their climb, they passed the halfway point, the distant pinpricks of light from settlements below a stark reminder of their exposure on the rock face. A loose stone dislodged beneath Eli's foot, tumbling down the cliff face with heart-stopping clatter. Both froze in position, Josephine's hand moving to the specialized pistol secured against her lower back, a weapon designed specifically for situations requiring absolute silence. Above them, a lantern appeared at the cliff edge, its beam sweeping across the rock face. As a guard investigated the sound, Josephine signaled Eli to remain motionless, the spider harnesses allowing them to maintain position with minimal strain despite the precarious angle. The guard's lantern passed within feet of their position, but the black-dyed leather of their equipment, combined with strategic positioning in shadow pockets, kept them invisible from above. After an excruciating minute, the guard withdrew, apparently satisfied that the noise came from natural rock movement. They resumed their ascent with even greater caution, each movement now calculated to eliminate any possibility of detection. They reached the summit edge shortly before midnight, pausing just below the rim to assess their final approach. Josephine produced a specialized periscopic device from her equipment, another of her wartime inventions that allowed observation from cover without exposing the user. The view confirmed their intelligence. 6 men maintained the communication station, with equipment arrayed around a central fire pit that provided both light and warmth against the night chill. Most critically, she identified the target of their operation, a lockbox containing the Blackwater's codebooks and communication schedules. Without these materials, their entire signaling network would collapse, individual outposts left isolated without coordination. "We need 15 minutes undisturbed at the communications table," she whispered to Eli. "Not for theft, but for modification." From a specialized compartment in her harness, Josephine retrieved what appeared to be ordinary pencils. In reality, each contained concentrated chemical compounds that, when applied to paper, would gradually alter the written content through controlled degradation of the ink, transforming coordinates, changing schedules, and subtly modifying codes in ways that wouldn't be immediately detected. "We don't need to destroy their communication system," she explained. "We need to corrupt it in ways they won't recognize until it's too late. Misinformation is more devastating than silence." Their infiltration plan leveraged human predictability. According to their intelligence, the guard rotation occurred at midnight, with a 5-minute window when the summit would have reduced vigilance during the handover of responsibilities. This brief opportunity would provide their entry point if they could create appropriate distraction. From another compartment, Josephine produced a device unlike anything Eli had seen before, a metal cylinder with precise timer mechanisms and specialized vents. This was no explosive, but rather an atmospheric disruptor that would release compounds triggering specific physiological responses without revealing its technological origin. "Primitive minds attribute what they don't understand to superstition," she noted, making final adjustments to the timer. "The Blackwaters will be no different." At precisely midnight, as the guard rotation began, Josephine deployed the device. Over the cliff edge opposite their position, its timer set to activate in 30 seconds. They waited in silence as the countdown proceeded, the device tumbling down the eastern slope to land among rocks far below the trail. When it activated, the effect was immediate yet subtle. The specialized compounds released created no visible smoke or obvious sound, but the chemical mixture carried on the night breeze began affecting the guards within moments. First disorientation, then accelerated heart rate, followed by visual distortions, symptoms that frontier minds would immediately attribute to supernatural causes rather than scientific intervention. The guards' reactions provided the perfect distraction. Men suddenly clutching their heads, staring wide-eyed into the darkness, weapons raised against perceived threats that existed only in chemically altered perception. Several abandoned their positions, moving toward the eastern trail in confused response to the unfamiliar symptoms. Now, Josephine signaled, and they slipped over the summit edge, using the confusion to move undetected toward the communications table. The remaining guards were entirely focused on their affected companions, leaving the codebooks momentarily unattended. Working with practiced efficiency, Josephine began implementing the core of their mission, not destruction, but precise modification. Using her specialized implements, she altered key elements in the codebooks, changing meeting coordinates by single digits, shifting scheduling times by hours, modifying recognition signals in ways subtle enough to go undetected during routine communications but significant enough to disrupt critical operations. "This will cascade through their entire organization," she whispered as her hands moved with surgical precision across the documents. "Each message sent using these corrupted codes will create confusion, missed connections, and eventually complete operational breakdown." Eli kept watch, signaling when guards began to recover from the chemical effects. Their window was closing rapidly as the initial confusion gave way to heightened vigilance. Josephine completed the final modifications just as shouts from the trail indicated reinforcements arriving from the lower guard post. Their extraction required timing as precise as their infiltration. Rather than retreating the way they had come, Josephine led them to the western edge of the summit, an approach that appeared to offer no escape, but in fact provided their optimal withdrawal route. From her equipment, she produced another specialized device, a controlled descent mechanism she called the Osprey. Unlike conventional ropes that would be immediately visible against the rock face, the Osprey utilized a carbon fiber line barely thicker than fishing twine, but capable of supporting tremendous weight. Its internal braking system allowed rapid, yet controlled descent without requiring exposed handholds. Mechanical advantage works both ways, she explained, securing the device to a stable rock formation. Up or down, it's about distribution of force and calculated resistance. As the first guards returned to the communications table, Josephine and Eli slipped over the western edge, the Osprey's mechanism allowing them to descend the sheer cliff at a controlled rate that bordered on freefall while remaining completely silent. Within minutes, they had dropped beyond detection range, the thin carbon line invisible against the dark rock face. By the time the Blackwater gang realized their communication center had been compromised, Josephine and Eli were already a mile from Eagle Point, making their way through terrain specifically selected to eliminate tracking. The chemical compounds affecting the guards would leave no residue, no evidence of technological intervention. The modifications to their codebooks would not be discovered until the damage had propagated throughout their communication network. They'll attribute the guards' experience to superstition, Josephine noted as they reached the safety of a concealed ravine. Frontier minds look to supernatural explanations when science exceeds their understanding. And the codebook modifications, Eli asked, will appear as human error at first, miscommunications, missed connections, failed operations. By the time they identified deliberate sabotage, their entire coordination network will be compromised beyond repair. Dawn found them at Josephine's fifth cache, a resupply point nestled within a cave system several miles from Eagle Point. Unlike her primary repositories, this location contained minimal equipment but offered perfect concealment for recovery and planning between operations. As they reviewed the night's achievements, new intelligence arrived via one of Eli's contacts, a young Apache scout who had observed significant movement at the Blackwater gang's main camp. "Silas has recalled his lieutenants," the scout reported. "All of them, even those managing distant operations. They gather for council at first light tomorrow." This development confirmed the effectiveness of Josephine's strategy. The systematic disruption of the Blackwater's operations had forced their leadership to concentrate, exactly the response she had designed her actions to provoke. "They're adapting faster than expected," she observed, updating her tactical assessment, consolidating decision-making rather than maintaining distributed authority. "Is that bad for our plan?" Eli asked. "On the contrary," Josephine replied, her expression revealing the cold calculation that had made her legendary during the war. "It creates precisely the vulnerability we need for the final phase. Concentrated leadership means concentrated targeting." From a concealed compartment within the cave, she retrieved a leather case, unlike those used for her conventional weapons. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the case itself a work of art with custom brass fittings and hand-tooled designs. Inside, nestled in velvet compartments, lay components that could be assembled into a weapon unlike any other in existence. "The Spectre," she said, removing the first precision-machined piece. "For close encounters, it's undetectable. For an ambush, it's perfect." As she began assembling the weapon with reverent precision, Josephine explained the adjustment to their Operational timeline. The Council of Lieutenants presents an opportunity we cannot ignore. With their leadership concentrated, we can deliver a precision strike that will decapitate their entire organization simultaneously. The systematic dismantling of the Blackwater Gang had proceeded exactly as she had designed. First intelligence disruption at Cooperton, then supply line interdiction at Granite Pass, now communication breakdown from Eagle Point. Each operation had built upon the previous, creating cascading failures that forced the gang to adapt in ways that ultimately made them more vulnerable. Tomorrow, she told Eli as dawn light filtered into their hidden sanctuary, we implement the final phase, not at their main camp where they expect threat, but at a location of our choosing where they believe themselves secure. The specialized ammunition she began preparing would serve purposes beyond conventional lethality, each round designed not just to eliminate specific targets, but to create precisely calculated psychological impact on survivors. The Blackwater Gang had burned her trading post believing they were eliminating a simple widow. They would soon face the full architectural precision of the quartermaster's response, a systematic deconstruction of their entire criminal enterprise, engineered by the very woman whose life they thought they had destroyed. They wanted to send a message by burning my trading post, Josephine observed, as she completed the Spectre's assembly. Tomorrow, I deliver my response. Whiskey Creek Lodge stood as a monument to ill-gotten gains at the edge of Rattlesnake Valley, its hewn timber walls and stone foundation built with profits from the Blackwater Gang's operations. Unlike their crude camps and hidden outposts, the lodge represented Silas Blackwater's aspirations beyond mere banditry. A permanent headquarters where territorial influence could be consolidated and expanded. The structure had been carefully chosen for its defensive advantages, clear sight lines in all directions, elevated position overlooking the single approach road, reinforced walls that could withstand conventional attack. In military terms, it represented an almost impregnable position against frontal assault. Almost. From her concealed position half a mile east, Josephine studied the lodge through specialized optics as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley. The past 72 hours had transformed the Blackwater Gang's operational structure exactly as she had engineered. Her systematic dismantling of their outposts, communication networks and supply lines had forced a concentration of leadership. Unprecedented in their organizational history, 7 lieutenants, she murmured, counting the distinctive horses in the corral beside the lodge. Silas has recalled his entire command structure. Beside her, Marshal Blackwood nodded grimly. Never seen them gathered like this. Must be desperate times in the Blackwater operation. The Marshal's presence represented a calculated addition to Josephine's final phase. Unlike Eli, whose skills served reconnaissance and intelligence purposes, Blackwood brought official authority that would prove essential for what would follow. The systematic destruction of the Blackwater Gang required not just elimination of leadership, but legitimization of the outcome. "Your men are in position?" Josephine asked, making final adjustments to her specialized sighting equipment. 2 deputies on the North Ridge, 3 more with the posse at the valley entrance, Blackwood confirmed. None visible, all holding position. Until your signal. The plan represented architectural precision applied to tactical operations. Each element had been designed with multiple contingencies, each participant positioned with specific purpose. Unlike conventional law enforcement approaches that relied on overwhelming force, Josephine's strategy leveraged psychological pressure, environmental manipulation, and precision intervention at critical vulnerability points. From her equipment case, she removed the components of the Spectre, her masterpiece weapon now fully assembled and calibrated for the specific conditions of Whiskey Creek. The rifle bore little resemblance to conventional firearms. Its lines sleeker, its mechanism more complex, its purpose far beyond simple lethality. Remember, she instructed Blackwood. "When the operation begins, your men maintain their positions until the signal flare. No matter what they witness, no matter what they hear, they hold until that specific signal." The marshal studied her with newfound respect, born of witnessing her methodical dismantling of the Blackwater operation over preceding days. "This isn't your first military operation, is it?" The principles remain consistent, whether supplying armies or eliminating criminal enterprises, Josephine replied, her focus unwavering as she prepared specialized ammunition for the task ahead. "Identify structural vulnerabilities. Apply precise pressure at key points. Allow the architecture to collapse under its own weight." Inside Whiskey Creek Lodge, the Blackwater leadership faced crisis unprecedented in their operations. Though Josephine couldn't hear their deliberations, her intelligence network had provided detailed information about the growing chaos within their ranks. The corrupted codebooks from Eagle Point had created cascading failures in coordination. The supply interdiction at Granite Pass had left Western outposts undersupplied and vulnerable. The neutralized informants in Cooperton had blinded them to law enforcement movements. Most damaging had been the psychological impact. An invisible enemy, systematically dismantling their operation with military precision, had transformed the Blackwater's tactical confidence into paranoid uncertainty. Men accustomed to offensive operations now jumped at shadows, questioning loyalties, suspecting infiltration from within. As dusk approached, Josephine began implementing the final phase of her strategy. Unlike her previous operations that relied on stealth and indirect approach, this culmination would combine multiple methods simultaneously. A symphony of precisely timed interventions designed to create maximum disorientation before the decisive strike. The first element activated as darkness fell. Specialized devices positioned around the lodge perimeter during the previous night by Eli's Apache contacts. These were not explosives or weapons in conventional sense, but rather environmental manipulators that would transform the battlefield itself into an active component of the operation. From her command position, Josephine activated the sequence with a specialized signaling device. Immediately, the first manipulators released concentrated compounds into the evening air, chemical formulations that would influence perception without revealing their technological origin. Within minutes, the Blackwater sentries began experiencing the effects: subtle disorientation, heightened anxiety, distorted distance perception. "The compounds target specific neurological responses," she explained to Blackwood. "Not enough to incapacitate, but sufficient to degrade decision-making capabilities and reaction times." The second phase initiated 20 minutes later as the chemicals reached full effectiveness. Specialized acoustic devices activated in sequence, generating infrasound frequencies below human hearing threshold, but capable of inducing profound psychological discomfort. Vibrations that resonated through the lodge's wooden structure, creating impressions of imminent collapse without visible cause. Through her specialized optics, Josephine observed the mounting confusion within the Blackwater ranks. Sentries abandoned assigned positions, drawn toward the main building by growing uncertainty. Inside, visible through windows, lieutenants gestured frantically as Silas Blackwater attempted to maintain control of increasingly chaotic response. They're experiencing architectural breakdown, both physically and organizationally, she noted with clinical detachment. External pressure revealing internal structural weaknesses. The third phase represented Josephine's most sophisticated intervention: targeted communication disruption. Specialized devices planted near their horses activated, emitting frequencies that agitated the animals without apparent cause. Simultaneously, Modified reflectors positioned on distant ridgelines created momentary light patterns easily mistaken for signal flashes, suggesting coordinated movement among non-existent attackers. From the Blackwater's perspective, they faced imminent assault from multiple directions by an enemy they couldn't identify, a crushing psychological pressure that forced critical decision-making under compromised cognitive conditions. "Now," Josephine announced, settling behind the Spectre as the chaos reached optimal levels, "we remove the keystones." The specialized rifle made barely a whisper as it discharged, the sound suppression system she'd perfected during government service, eliminating the telltale report that would betray her position. The projectile, unlike any conventional ammunition, struck with pinpoint precision through a second-floor window, finding Silas Blackwater's lieutenant exactly where intelligence had placed him. Before the first target collapsed, Josephine had already adjusted her aim, the Spectre's mechanism allowing for rapid reposition without compromising accuracy. The second shot found another lieutenant standing near the main fireplace, the specialized ammunition designed not just for elimination, but for specific psychological impact on witnesses. 7 targets, 7 specialized rounds, she murmured, working through the sequence with mechanical precision, each calibrated for maximum structural effect. Blackwood watched in stunned silence as Josephine systematically removed the Blackwater leadership without a single missed shot, without betraying her position, without giving them opportunity to comprehend the nature of the attack. This wasn't combat as he understood it. This was architectural demolition applied to human organization. Inside the lodge, the remaining Blackwaters faced incomprehensible catastrophe, their leadership eliminated by an invisible attacker that made no sound, left no trace, offered no opportunity for response. The psychological breaking point Josephine had engineered through days of systematic pressure finally shattered their organizational integrity. Men began fleeing the lodge, abandoning defensive positions, prioritizing individual survival over collective response. Some fired blindly into the darkness, others scrambled for horses, many simply ran toward the valley entrance where, unknown to them, Marshal Blackwood's deputies waited in concealed positions. "Signal your men," Josephine instructed, retrieving a specialized flare pistol from her equipment. "The structure is collapsing exactly as designed." The flare illuminated the valley in harsh red light, revealing the full extent of the Blackwater's disintegration. Deputies emerged from concealment, moving to intercept fleeing gang members who surrendered without resistance, their will to fight extinguished by the systematic dismantling of everything they understood about their own operational security. Josephine observed the scene with the detached assessment of an architect surveying a controlled demolition. Her strategy had unfolded with precision few military commanders could achieve. Not through overwhelming force, but through sequential pressure applied precisely where the structure was most vulnerable. "You didn't kill Silas," Blackwood noted, as they watched the deputies securing prisoners. "Intentionally," Josephine confirmed, disassembling the Spectre with practiced efficiency. His lieutenants were the operational keystones. Without them, his authority collapses. Without his organization, he becomes merely a man, one who will face territorial justice rather than dying as a legend. The Marshal studied her with newfound understanding. "This was never about revenge for your trading post." "Revenge is emotional and inefficient," she replied, securing the specialized weapon components in their custom case. This was architectural correction, the systematic dismantling of a criminal enterprise through precession application of pressure at structural vulnerabilities. As dawn approached, Josephine and Blackwood descended toward the lodge, where territorial deputies had secured the surviving Blackwaters. Among them, Silas stood in shackles, his once fearsome presence diminished to bitter defiance as he watched. his organization disintegrate around him. His eyes widened with recognition as Josephine approached. "The trading post widow," he snarled. "You did this somehow." "You burned my business believing you were eliminating competition," she replied with calm precision. "You failed to recognize what you were actually confronting." Confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about? You were just a woman running a trading post." "That was merely the facade, Mr. Blackwater." For the first time, Josephine allowed herself the satisfaction of revealing the truth. Behind it stood the quartermaster, the architectural mind you unknowingly challenged when you set those flames. Understanding dawned in Silas's eyes, followed by the crushing realization of his fundamental miscalculation. "The army weapons designer from the war," he whispered. "The one they called the ghost supplier." Josephine neither confirmed nor denied, her silence more devastating than any admission. The Blackwater gang had burned a trading post, believing they were intimidating a simple widow. Instead, they had awakened an architect of systematic destruction who had dismantled their entire criminal enterprise with precision they still couldn't comprehend. As territorial authorities processed the captured gang members, Josephine made her way to a solitary ridge overlooking the valley. The morning sun illuminated the ruined landscape of the Blackwater operation. Outposts neutralized, supply lines severed, communication networks corrupted, leadership eliminated. The architectural demolition was complete. The structure collapsed entirely under pressures applied with mathematical precision. Marshal Blackwood joined her on the ridge, his expression reflecting newfound respect, tinged with wariness. "What happens now? Does the quartermaster return to the shadows?" Josephine's gaze turned toward the distant canyon where her trading post had stood. "The trading post will be rebuilt," she replied after careful consideration. "The community needs it, and I've grown accustomed to this territory." "And the arsenals hidden throughout the canyon?" he asked cautiously. "Remain exactly where they are," she answered with quiet certainty. "Some architectural designs are best left undisturbed until necessity demands their implementation." As they rode back toward Ironwood Canyon, Josephine reflected on the symmetry of the situation. The Blackwater gang had destroyed her public facade, forcing the emergence of capabilities they couldn't have imagined. Her response had destroyed their organization with equal thoroughness, but with the calculated precision that distinguished architectural demolition from simple destruction. The trading post would indeed be rebuilt, its exterior restored to match community expectations, but hidden within its ordinary structure would remain the extraordinary capabilities that had systematically dismantled the most dangerous criminal enterprise in the territory. The public would remember how law enforcement had finally captured the infamous Blackwater gang. While few would connect the widow's trading post with their downfall, Josephine preferred this outcome. Her most effective operations had always been those where results spoke loudly while their architect remained invisible. As they crested the final rise overlooking Ironwood Canyon, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction at a design perfectly executed, a structure dismantled with precision that would become legendary among those few who understood what had truly occurred. The Blackwater gang had indeed raided a widow's trading post, completely unaware she had hidden arsenals throughout the canyon. Their fatal miscalculation had awakened the quartermaster, and the systematic precision of her response would ensure no criminal enterprise would dare repeat their mistake for generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.